Welcome to Elysium Theatre Company's second podcast as part of our 50th anniversary tour of the island by Athol Fugard, Kani and Winston Ntshona. Recorded with Durham University, we'll be looking at the island's position in South African theatre, its role in resistance to apartheid, and its influence on world theatre in general. I'm Jake Murray, Director of the Production and Artistic Director of Elysium. With me is Lucian Msamati, Tanzanian-born actor who now lives and works in the UK. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you've done both here and in Africa, and some of your background.
Well, hello. I am from a Tanzanian family. My family are from Tanzania, or my extended family. I grew up in Zimbabwe. I am primarily known, I suppose, as an actor. But I consider myself in my spirit to be a theatre maker. And I know for some that can sound very, very grandiose and pompous, but it is the truth, because this art, this craft that I love so much, I learned by making it. I've had the pleasure and privilege and challenge of being part of companies in Zimbabwe, being part of companies here in the United Kingdom. Just telling stories and trying to, more than anything, I think, trying to locate the human beings in all of these stories. I think one of the greatest challenges making art that is from the part of the world that I grew up in, I'm from, is that people see the problems first. And people see the great big political banner headlines, the socio-economic struggles, and very often the human beings, the day-to-day human beings, are not seen. I remember once the great South African actor, writer, director, producer, Selo Mangekadlube, saying how he grew up in the very heart of the cauldron of apartheid South Africa, and yet he said, you would of course walk around every day, and there's all sorts of everyday life nonsense going on, the mundane, people, messing around with each other's spouses, people forgetting to pick up the shopping, but just all the normal everyday thing that make these stories human. Though, because after all, all of us are there to survive. Yeah, and it has been. I think it's also been very interesting to be sort of, I suppose, a participant in and an observer of the change in terms of the representation of Africans, the African story, Black stories, that to see that some parts of the world are finally accepting that, it's not a monolith. No, this is not a monolith. This is it is as diverse as the grains of sand on the beach. Yes, and so yes, that's it. It continues to be a challenge, because I think what happens in any evolution is that there are necessary stages, and I think box ticking is a necessary stage, and it's very well intentioned, and it comes from the right place, but it can very easily become a stumbling block. Yes, the beauty of it is that many people are seeing that is seeing it for what it is, and understanding it for what it is. But then also, I was reminded by another very dear friend that when I played Iago at the RSC, the first non-white actor, first Black actor to play that role at the Royal Shakespeare Company, a very, very wonderfully talented, mixed, diverse company. And, she pointed out to me that, you will be their first Iago. That's that's already their horizon is a different one, and that is a great sort of joy and privilege and a delight.
You bring up a really interesting point, because one of the things that for us has been fascinating doing the island is that it's the 50th anniversary of it. And when the play was originally performed, as you say, the world was a very, very different place. apartheid was still very profoundly in place. And for the two actors who played it, John and Winston, it was a revolutionary act doing it and leaving South Africa and performing it in England and America. And here we are doing it 50 years later, when a generation of people don't know about apartheid or that whole history. In your experience growing up in Zimbabwe, how far do you think we've come? It's interesting what you say about the monolith and the landscape of how black performers and stories can be told. Because I remember when I was young, there was a lot of African drama in Britain. And how do you feel that's changed now? Do you think African stories are more present? Do you think that the purpose of theatre is changed in that respect?
Oh, that's a big one. I think there has definitely been a quantum shift. But what I think we are still to see is that the how can I express it best? The likes of Athol Fugard, for instance, the likes of Wole Soyinka, for instance, the likes of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan, or these are very much sort of the bedrock of the first wave, I suppose, of neo-colonial or anti-colonial and African intellectual creative expression. And they are quite rightly lauded and celebrated. I think now what we're seeing is a struggle to understand and to remember that we are building a canon. And when you build a canon has got many volumes of it, many volumes to it. And I still feel that sometimes some shows, are created and that becomes it. This is it. This is the flagship. This must be the be all and end all, when it simply isn't and shouldn't be, and it doesn't have to, because what then happens is that the artists don't develop as well. Suddenly the room and the right to fail is almost non-existent, and that's part of the growth of creativity. Has the world changed? Yes, it has, but also it hasn't, because we are everything seems to be cyclical. That the and perhaps the identities of the oppressed and the oppressor changes, but in essence, the core struggles are still the same. However, I think the fact that we're living at a time when there is, for better and for worse, a proliferation of information, the fact that it's very hard now to hide does change things. Interestingly, it doesn't necessarily improve quality.
Yeah,
doesn't improve the quality of things, or even the quality, of debate, of discussion, of the work necessarily. But I do believe that's actually what is changing, is that people know more. And when people know more, the sort of the forerunners, the movers, the shakers, are the ones who change the narrative. And I think, really, so it is also worthwhile accepting and remember that it takes a long time for real change to happen. It's a marathon, funnily enough, very, very dear, a few years ago, some years ago, one friend of mine said, it was German, a German actor, right? And we were clinking glasses on an evening, setting the world to rights. And he said, the thing is that there are still people to this day who are denying the Holocaust.
Yeah.
There are still people who are, and people who you believe should know or would know better, who are still, it just takes a long time.
It's interesting you say that, because having worked, when we were doing the island, we did a lot of talking about, all three of us pooled our resources of what we knew about political struggles and imprisonment. And I'd spent years reading Primo Levi and Solzhenitsyn, and have just started reading Primo Levi again, just to remind myself. And as I read I'm reading The Drowned and the Saved, the awareness that as you say, as the discourse moves on and changes, and I think the world is changing, because a lot of the countries and parts of the world which were once colonized are now more confident, have more influence, and so a much more powerful kind of presence on the global stage.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating as the Holocaust recedes that we're in danger of. And what's interesting about Levy is he's constantly reminding us, think about how you would have behaved. Think, learn from this. And I think I want to go back to something else you said on that today about the ordinary, the world of the. As you say, we see the big political movement, and we think that's all we need to know, these huge sweeps. And yet, the only way we encounter those broad sweeps is through our individual experience. That's a function that theatre has a very vital role in doing. And the three playwrights you talked about were, of course, brilliant. Would you agree?
Yes, they were. And are. I mean, it is interesting to look back over those canonical foundational works and see how, in some ways they've not aged well. Yes, in ways they remain vital, but I think that's also okay. And that's absolutely okay. I have performed in Master Harold and the Boys.
Yes,
which is it's such a well constructed piece of writing.
Yes,
some would say that it's very classical. Which is very, very classical, and the pacing is different. But I would say, that is exactly the point of it. That is where I think it reflects life at its absolute best. That this ordinary, very ordinary day, this ordinary, boring, rainy day, without there being a great, big, massive political spotlight on it, takes you to the very heart and soul of what's a nonsense and what a horrible thing apartheid actually was, and what it did to human beings, it poisons human beings, and that is absolutely the power that theatre has.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I read it. I saw that you'd been in that, and Master Harold was the first Fugard I ever saw back in the 80s, and I still remember. And I read it again on just before one of the performances of The Island in Hexham. And I was struck by, in one sense, how old-fashioned it was. Do you know what's set in the 1950s? As you say, it's very beautifully constructed and elegant, and yet by the end of it, you're devastated.
Yes.
And because, as you say, it's a microcosm. That little encounter between those three men is a microcosm for the whole system. Exactly. But ask you a little bit more about what your experience of playing. It was Sam, wasn't it? The experience. What was it like playing that as a man in 2020? Was it 22, 21?
2019, just months before the world shut down. The world shut down. Well, the first thing to say is that apartheid as a system is something that's very real for all. It's very real. It is something that was in the national political public discourse growing up in Zimbabwe, which was one of the frontline states that they were called. And these were the countries that neighbored South Africa. And so very much Zimbabwe was at the forefront of the anti-apartheid movement. There are so many stories to be told, but apartheid was real, very, very real. And Zimbabwe had only just got independence in 1980. So in the time that I grew up, I grew up in the 80s. So and into my teens and the 90s, but this is not some big foreign distant thing for us, growing up in Zimbabwe, that even though it is a majority Black African country, it was a British colony. And, the racial divides are very, very, for me, very real, because that's exactly what is mirrored in the play in Master Harold. Even though it is set 40 years before, it's all very real. And so it was emotional. Emotional in the sense that it was a reminder of just how dehumanizing these systems are, and the absurdity of it. How can you're looking at these three human beings. You've got these two men, and you've got a young boy, and we soon realize very quickly. These two men have basically been surrogate parents to this boy for his entire life. This lonely boy. These two men, and Sam in particular, has basically been his dad. So much more of a father to him than his own biological father, who, and again, this is what is beautiful, that we understand, that his father has a drug problem. His father is an amputee. I think there is also, this kind of a notion that his father is a veteran of war. It's very sad. It was all very, very sad. But there is also, and this is crucial to remember, there is a generation of white Africans. There's a generations of white Africans. I know this is going to sound very, I don't mean it to be sweeping, but there is a moment when you become, in my observation, sentient of your whiteness. And this comes through very powerfully in this play, in Master Harold and the Boys. When this young man turns on the people he loves the most and turns on them in the most horrifying, sickening way. And you realize that here we were on the brink of this beautiful, next chapter, next level of life, only to be brought right down to the same mundane structures, the same malevolent structures. But I think that one way of looking at it is inspiration, but I think it cuts through every single aspect of human development. I think there is a point at which one becomes aware of one's gender or aware of one's sex. I hope I've used those terms in the correct way. One becomes aware of one's economic status. There are all of these moments which are foundational. Now, we know that actually the story turned out to be, for young Master Harold, it is a happy ending because, Harold is based on Athol Fugard, his most autobiographical work. And he went on to become a world-renowned playwright who was at the forefront of the anti-apartheid. He does get, and in the most beautiful and painful way, this was his way of paying back. Yes, because it's in our research, we discovered that the very real characters these two men are based on, that's without giving too much away, but that's the incident, sort of the switch in the play that upon which everything turns was real. It actually happened, and many years later, as the young playwright grew and grew, he tracked him down, and they reminisced and they had a really good time. And further on, when finally they performed the play in South Africa, the playwrights asked John Kani, the legendary John Kani, who I think was, if memory serves me correctly, was one of the first to play that part. I think he played Willie in the original. I think it was the day. And John Kani went to track down Sam, went to find the real Sam, and they discovered, sadly, that he had literally died the day before. And so he never got a chance to, the playwright never got a chance to to give Sam his creative apology. Yeah, shall we? Yeah.
I think if there's something that sets Fugard aside from so many playwrights, and I think that's why his plays resonate now again, or are resonating again, because when you were doing Master Harold, we were doing Playland up here, and I think there was a kind of Bloodknot down, and there was like a kind of mini revival going on of his work.
Yeah,
is that he knows exactly how those divisions work, and the power in Master Harold and his boys is it's a little boy who's is able to treat these two adult men as servants because they're servants, but there's an added level because he's white and they're black.
Yeah.
But I think and what's painful for a white audience watching that is you fall in love with all three of them.
Exactly.
And then you see the character who is white behaving the worst. And he's showing how these systems distort all of us. And yet what's beautiful about, and what makes that play tragic and so powerful, is that Fugard never gave up on the idea that we could somehow reach over those barriers and relate to each other as people.
Yeah.
And the ending of that play is heartbreaking because he doesn't allow that to happen. You don't see it happen, and I think that's very powerful. It's an amazing story. Thank you. You mentioned growing up in Zimbabwe with South Africa next to you. What was your feeling when apartheid ended? What did it feel like?
And this is my answer is going to be a little bit long, but I have a very dear friend who is whose family are from Rwanda, and he spent part of, and so the 1994 genocide is very real. But and he's done a fantastic one-man show about it. But he said, if I say to you refugee camp, what are the images that come into your head? And I told him, he said, can I tell you that I was a teenage boy in a refugee camp, and it was, you wouldn't believe that you're in a refugee camp. I did all the things that teenage boys do, put up all the hijinks, chasing girls, having crushes, all of it, just all of this. And so for me, as a school kid, what I do remember is the big hoopla. Quite right. Well, hoopla is better than hoopla. That sounds derogatory. It's not meant. But there was I remember the Nelson Mandela being released from prison. It was huge. It was absolutely huge. It was a huge thing. And I remember also that when Nelson Mandela, newly released from prison, was then invited by the now late president, Robert Mugabe, to come to South Africa, to visit Zimbabwe. He declared that day Nelson Mandela Day. And the reason I remember it, Nelson Mandela Day, because it was my birthday.
That's not so bad.
And we were off school. Wonderful. It's, again, it is, I can't retrofit my now adult brain and say, well, I felt I did, because I was at school, getting up to what all school kids get up to. I suppose the difference is that when you hear stories of, oh, there was a car bomb here, or there was that demonstration there, it is a part of your everyday world. And also, I think it's also important to say that growing up in Zimbabwe, that was a prosperous, majority Black African nation, even though it was riddled with its own complexities and issues. We were living in the post-apartheid reality. So for us, the notion that there was this extremity happening over there was terrifying, but it was certainly for me very distant. It was a distant thing. None of this, however, dilutes the fact that we were very aware of how it was everywhere, it was every day, it was. And in fact, I remember some of my late father was a very respected doctor and a teacher or doctor, a lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe, and so mixed with a lot of peers on the very high end of academic intellectual life, which of course intersected with political life. And so there were a few people who, how I realized, were quite politically vocal intellectuals, and one of them gave us. We were, I remember us as kids, we were playing out one day, messing around as kids do, and we got these stickers. He gave us these stickers. Sort of one of the cool older people that parents know from around the world. And I remember putting one up in my room that I shared with my late brother, and I can't now the boy was my father, who came in and told us both off sternly, telling us, "Do you know what that is? Do you know what you don't have any idea what that is?" And we eventually had to peeled it off very unsuccessfully. But it was basically an ANC sticker, support the ANC, or like a real kind of very, very, you shouldn't be, as an 11, 12-year-old kid, sticking it up because it looks nice.
Yeah.
And so I suppose that was the intersection with the adult world. Your parents going, "Do you understand that people are getting blown up because of this?" And you're sticking it up like it's something cool. Well,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think here's the other thing that we must be careful of, all of us, as we all grow and evolve and develop, is next. Having retrospective anger or guilt isn't helpful. How are you supposed to know about how are you supposed to know that the world is falling apart over there, or people are suffering over there when you're a kid, And to all intents and purposes, I'm very aware I was a very happy, comfortable, suburban Black African kid. Hurrah! A lot of people and this is the wonderful irony. People cannot understand. There's some people who don't understand that my upbringing in Zimbabwe, this part of the developing world where there was all these problems in Black Africa, was actually very comfortable. Yeah, and very comfortable. I went to very good schools. I lived in, very good, comfortable, safe, happy neighborhoods. The difference is, I suppose, that you are really close to it all. There's no the divide. You have to go. You're still all taking the same public transport. You're going to school with, the children of domestic workers and the children of government ministers are all going to school together. You can see that. It is. I know I'm stumbling a little bit, but it's all very evocative and very. You don't punish yourself for being a kid living your life.
Yes.
Because it is the job of adults to make sure you don't have to.
Yes, absolutely.
And it is the adults who, should be held accountable, not you.
Yes. That's very moving and beautifully put. So I'm just going to ask you one last question. I mean, it's been an incredible interview. You've been an artistic director of the theatre companies, in Zimbabwe and in the UK.
Yes, that is correct.
And I suppose what I'd like to ask you is what do you feel is where are the similarities and the differences between Zimbabwean theatre and British, and what is your hope for theatre in the future? What role do you think it can play?
Wow. Well, first of all, I would say that for having had an incredible start to a career in Zimbabwe, being you're doing theatre for more company, learning on the job, and learning from, I've got to say that what would be called semi-professional, people who were established professionals in their work and in their working life. And in the evenings, there they'd be in the rehearsal rooms, dedicated, committed, such, and not getting paid for it.
Yes.
But doing it for the sheer thrill and joy and delight of it. I would say that early on, in where I think we struggled as a company, Over the Edge theatre company I formed with very, very dear friends of mine, we're friends to this day, we're family practically, was that perhaps the struggle to be taken seriously. I think for some people, the fact that you are, we had all done drama at school, and everyone says to you, "Oh, you're all very talented. Oh, you're also good. It's really lovely watching." And then you start taking it seriously yourself, but then you're dealing with people who are like, "Oh, come on, do I have to pay this amount of money to come and watch?" They're like, well, yes, you do, because we didn't just show up 5 minutes ago to put this together. But then there was also the fact that you are in a relatively small country with a relatively small industry, and when you can get to that top of that industry very, very quickly, the room to improve, to grow, isn't always there. I would say that what I loved about coming to the UK was that there was an established industry. It is established. It is real. There's real money. It's real. This is a business. It is show and it is business. This is what people do to make a living, and so take it serious.
Yes.
And there were times when I wish I could have brought certain people over to say, look, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about. You can't, it is no good reading a script that I've been given, and telling me, oh, we could do this. And me turning around and going, yeah, but you haven't done it, have you? It's well and good to read something that someone else has done and going, oh, well, it's just a bunch of words that put together. No, I mean, I could do this. And I think there are a lot of people that I wouldn't say now. It's not fair to say now. And I'd speak very much of my own experience from a good quarter of a century ago now, almost, But, just taking something seriously. That excellence is achieved when you take it seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that has evolved and changed. But I think the greatest tragedy for Zimbabwe is that for a country that is so rich, not only in resources and in people, Zimbabweans are also rich in resources and people in this education system. That the political rot has caused the collapse of these amazing systems, this amazing human resource that is now scattered all over the world. This amazing cultural pipeline that could really make Zimbabwe the hub of the world creativity has been destroyed, because really, when it comes down to it, I believe the people in power don't actually understand the power of culture. They see culture as something that is purely political and not something that is vital, not something that is, it's one of the greatest ironies of Zimbabwe's political history is that the reason why there was such a powerful and consistent opposition to the Mugabe regime was because the Mugabe regime at independence made education free for everyone.
Yeah.
Wants to give you this. And what happens 2 decades down? These mighty intellectuals are going, oh, hang on, excuse me.
Yeah. Well, I think that's I think pretty much every country in the world has a very ambiguous relationship now towards education and the arts in that respect. Can I ask you finally, have you taken any theatre back to Zimbabwe?
Oh, the last time? No, there was a play that I had written was performed behind closed doors, maybe about a decade ago. And, there was a great a company that did it. I was, of course, concerned for them, but they were adamant that they wanted to do it. And so, yes, I suppose that's, that has happened. But at the same time, it's, the legacy and the work that those of us, the diasporans, have done and are doing is so celebrated. It's so celebrated. And the work that is happening in Zimbabwe now, and that has been going on in all these years by people I grew up with, great theatre makers, musicians, artists, writers. It's thriving. It's growing. There's amazing things happening. When I think of Cook Off, which was Zimbabwe's very first film on Netflix that was done, I know all the people who made that, how hard they've worked to make this, and to look and see that, look at my people, look at them, bringing in spite of everything that has gone on, to still create this art, to still share it with the world. And I think that's the fact that you and I are having this conversation is a celebration of the fact that People have reached out that it does work. We have beaten the oppressors. You know, we are winning. Our side is winning.
And I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Lucian, thank you so much. It's an absolutely wonderful conversation. All your insights into acting, your experience, South Africa, Zimbabwe theatre, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks a lot.
For more details of Elysium Theatre Company's 50th anniversary tour of the island, see the context box below. Thank you.